Let's go to Gloucester, Massachusetts, and Robert Levgold, who is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Columbia University and one of the foremost scholars on relations between the U.S. and Russia. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
My pleasure.
Now, here we have a situation where you have a U.S. president who has fired a man whose job it was to investigate whether that said president has relations that are untold with a foreign power. What do you make of it all?
Well, as the top of your story has it, preoccupation with Trump and the firing of Comey in the context of this investigation. It is now overshadowing virtually every other issue. But I would parse it. I think there are several dimensions to it. On the issue of Trump's business dealings with Russia, that's a separate matter from whether the campaign itself colluded with Russia as Russia attempted to influence the election. The business dealings, as I understand it, were attempted, and over the years, Trump has been basically unsuccessful in doing what he wanted to do in Moscow, including real estate deals, building Trump towers, and the like. On the collusion issue, you're back to the firing of Comey, and here I think the fundamental issue is whatever might be the outcome of the investigation on collusion, I suspect there will not be substantial collusion, and certainly not that involved Trump himself personally. But in the end, what undoes a White House, what undoes a presidency, is a cover-up that is greater than the crime. And Trump is now in danger of duplicating what Nixon did in Watergate, to some degree what Clinton did in the Lewinsky trial.
By overplaying his hand and trying to cover up what might not be such a big deal, yet still there are things that are strange in all of this. The noises on the campaign trail. We're not used to hearing a U.S. president speak so positively about his Russian counterpart. The subpoena that's been issued this week over Michael Flynn's conversations with the Russians. What is the relationship between not Trump himself, you're saying, but the people around Trump with Russia?
Well, in the case of Flynn and probably Roger Stone and Carter Page, the three principals that normally get named, I think they were involved with the Russians. They were involved with Russians before they were involved with the Trump campaign. That probably continued afterwards. But whether the way in which they were interacting with the Russians involved direct collusion in order to, if you will, amplify whatever the Russians were doing, and we're pretty confident the Russians were doing things to try to influence the election. So I think there probably almost certainly has been incorrect behavior, and particularly at the end with Flynn and his conversations with Ambassador Kislyak, the Russian ambassador in the United States. There, I think, is the heart of the matter. And I think that is, above all else, what leaves the administration very nervous. And as I say, this business of cover-up is worse than the crime. In this case, it may be less cover-up than it is obstruction. But that is going to simply keep this case going, and it'll create a real constraint on what kind of foreign policy the Trump administration can practice toward Russia. You see it now in Tillerson's efforts as a result of the conversations with Lavrov, to see what kinds of obstacles and impediments they face as they try to make progress in the U.S.-Russia relationship because of the case in U.S. domestic politics.
This is Doug Herbert here in Paris. You know, we saw the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov yesterday making some sort of sarcastic, I guess you could characterize them, comments when asked about Comey's firing, you know, saying, "Are you joking? Are you kidding? Are you kidding? He's been fired." Is there a sense the Russian media, from what we've been able to gather, has seemed to have soured on Donald Trump after giving him extensive coverage in the lead up to his election? What do you take what's the view from Moscow on the turn of events over here and the whole hullabaloo, if you will, over the Comey firing?
Well, you're quite right in terms of the evolution of Russian attitudes. There was a kind of hope that the new administration would turn things around and would re-engage Russia, adopt a more positive attitude toward it immediately after the election. But that quickly dissipated, as you suggested. And long before long before the investigation of the Russian role in the election became as hot an issue as it is now, the Russians were disappointed in the language of Nikki Haley at the United Nations, the things that General Mattis and others were saying when they came to Europe, attended the Munich Security Conference, even the statements that Tillerson made before he first met with Lavrov, all of them much more hardline than they expected from the Trump administration. In terms of the investigation here in the United States and the furor over the Russian role, the Russian attitude has been that this is really an American problem. They use the language that, for reasons they don't quite understand, a kind of hysteria in the United States over this doesn't concern them. But behind the scenes, I think they understand that this now is a significant issue in the bilateral relationship. I think somewhere down the road, the Russians are going to have to quietly, with the United States and with your government, the French government, begin talking about the role the Russian agencies have had in these elections. But for the moment, as you suggested, Minister of Defense, Minister of State, Foreign Minister Lavrov has ridiculed all of this. Final word on where the relationship is. Judging from the Tillerson conversations with Lavrov in Moscow and now in Washington, and some of the things others in the administration have said, I think the Trump administration and the Putin leadership would like to begin taking a different tact. And if I were to summarize it in a single sentence, both sides are saying the relationship is now in a very deep hole. Let's stop digging and let's see whether there are some steps that we can take that will move us in another direction. And the focus on the concrete, in this case, is Syria.
The focus is Syria for the concrete. I want to get back to something you said just a moment ago, Robert Levgold. The Russians, beneath the rhetoric, understand what's going on really in Washington, understand what it all means, the storm right now on Capitol Hill. That's a big difference, I suppose, with the Cold War and the days when it was the U.S. versus the Soviet Union.
Well, we always had this question of fifth column and propaganda in the effort to influence politics within the other country. That's not new. What is new is the scale with which you can do it, particularly when you use social media or when you have a phenomenon like WikiLeaks, or the other elements that have certainly been enlarged, both in our election and your election, that is fake news and the way in which you can spread it. That does have an impact on an election.
Robert Levgold, many thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.